About what you need to do when you first come across a word that you don't know or understand. So we're going to spend a bit of time talking about that. We're going to look at what we call context clues, and we're going to focus on using the parts in order to understand the meaning of the word. So using the sentence. And then you're going to have your first 2 vocabulary words. So you'll get 2 vocabulary words today. One of them we're going to talk about over and over again. The other one we're going to touch on, but we're going to just use it as our vocabulary words. And then we're going to review the active reading strategies before we read a little bit about Mesopotamia. We are going to read about it today and focus on the reading of it, active reading of it today. And then tomorrow we're going to talk about constructive responses. So let's first look at the calendar. Now what I did with the calendar, I didn't give you one for last week. And I apologize for that. So it's last week's on one side and this week's on the other side. So we will look at the back side of this. It just has what we did last week on the other side, so you don't need to pay too much attention to it. No. No, we're not allowed.
I'm off no sleep. I'm off no sleep. She ain't no sleep.
Why don't do that?
He's not here.
It's like, because I had to go take a piss and I'm getting told I can't.
He was here the other day.
Everything about me makes you go hard. It makes you go hard.
I don't know his name. Look how it just came in.
I'm talking about my house. I'm talking about your hair, not your picture.
He was one of
Just so stressed
he a future graduate. I think he got like 31 credits or whatever. He got a credit, but he's in person. I seem like no response at all. Right. I'll be like, calm down.
I'd rather get in class at 11.
That's how it's about.
I didn't have to early period. I didn't know. She don't think she's going to
You know my cousin goes to school after the 8.
But as
Tatiana.
Okay, so let's look at the calendar and what we're going to get through this week. Okay, so looking at the calendar, this week we are going to go over today the PICA traits, the vocabulary, active reading strategies. Again, we're going to be focusing on active reading a lot this week because you will have a test on it on Thursday. So tomorrow we are going to again do vocabulary. We're going to focus on test-taking skills tomorrow. When we talk about those test-taking skills, we're going to talk about developing constructive responses, but we're also going to talk about things like multiple choice questions. So if you have multiple choice tests in science, I'm going to show you guys some strategies that you can use to be more successful. And then we're going to actually practice with those strategies as well. So we'll worry about those tomorrow. We're going to talk tomorrow about power and morality. How those two things don't always work together. So sometimes people have power, but they don't have high morals. Sometimes people have really high morals, but they don't have the ability to have a lot of power. So we're going to talk about those two things, and we're going to focus on Hammurabi. So for those of you who know Hammurabi, we're going to talk about him again. For those of you who don't know about Hammurabi, most people have very strong opinions about him. So we're going to explore those strong opinions, but we're going to explore those strong opinions with evidence from the text or from the piece. And that is what all of this constructive response information is all about. When you guys go to take your ECA, you're going to be giving a passage, and you have to respond to a prompt based on that passage. So you will have to use the information from that passage in your response. If you don't do that, you're not going to be able to pass it. So all we're doing this entire term is really focusing on how to construct those responses. We struggled a lot with that last term, so we're going to start it at the very beginning this time, and hopefully that will help you guys in creating those responses. But again, we're also going to be talking tomorrow about true-false questions. We're going to talk about matching. We're going to talk about multiple choice. We're going to talk about any type of questions that you may encounter. On Wednesday, we are going to talk about one more vocabulary word. That'll be a total of 5, so you're going to have 5 a week. You'll get 2 today, 2 tomorrow, and then the 5th one, on Wednesday, and then we'll review all 5 of them. When we review them, it'll be fairly quick. I'm not going to say that the quizzes are easy, but they're not super difficult. There's always a matching section, so you have to match up the definition of the word with its meaning. And then there are some open-ended questions. So the open-ended questions may just be asking you about something based on the terminology. It may be asking you to compare a couple of things. So that's going to vary. The vocabulary quiz will be on Thursday, and we're also going to have a test over active reading. So the active reading test that you guys will have will take a while. It is a difficult test. There's a large matching section. There are some open-ended questions, and then there's a section that requires some annotation. So you guys will have to take that test on Thursday. We'll see where you're at with that. And then you guys will get your first large assignment, which will be your personal narrative. You will get a large assignment, I don't want to say it's small, on Wednesday as well. You're going to get your novels on Wednesday. So by that point, we should be able to weed out people who are not going to be staying for the rest of the term. So we will figure that out, and I will get your novels. For those of you who've been in this class before, got a bunch of different novels. So you're going to be reading something different. The novels, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the procedure on that. We'll talk about all of that here on Wednesday. Yes?
Can you tell us what novel we're going to be reading?
I'm not going to I don't know who's going to read what yet, specifically, but we have a lot of novels. They allowed me to order a bunch of stuff, so I got a bunch of books. So they gave me a lot of books to choose from. So I really tried to make sure that it's something that you haven't read it before or experienced before. Most of the pieces, most of the novels, there's a movie version of it. So I try to get things that you haven't seen the movie version of because that really taints your understanding of the novel. But I also try to get something that you might be interested in. So that's why I ordered a bunch of books, because I felt like this would help a lot.
Kind of like last year.
Yeah, except the Kyle situation times everybody. So I really want to give you guys different books, things that I think you'll be very interested in. Okay? All right, any questions over the calendar?
Your hair looks nice.
Thank you. Just getting on my nerves, and I haven't been to sleep yet since Saturday, so I'm really tired, and this is my best. So the objectives that are listed over to the side, these are the goals that we have for each and every day. So the first part of this is set a goal and establish steps to complete that goal. That's really what you guys are doing with your Do Now, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit more with the FICA trait on goal setting. So we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of goal setting, and we're really going to focus on the SMART goals because that's something that I've done in the past a lot. My raises were based on that, and I got them every time. So we're going to talk about how you can create SMART goals, how you can establish those correctly and accurately, but how you can make that something that you do for yourself. So we'll spend some time talking about goal setting today. Use vocabulary skills to determine meanings of words. That's what we're going to do when we talk about the vocabulary strategies. We're going to focus on one strategy today that encompasses a lot of information. So you will want to take some notes over this because we're going to spend some time talking about something that you can do to be really successful when you come across words that you don't know. The The third one there, define terms. You're going to see that every time we have vocabulary. It's just the short definition of the goal or explanation of the goal. So these objectives are essentially the goals that we have to get you guys through the day's material. So as we look at this, we are going to talk a little bit more about goal setting. So with goal setting, I have a little bit of information here from Michael Jordan. Again, for those of you who have heard this presentation already once today, you have seen the full text of this. It is not September 11th. I'm going back in time. That was my brother's birthday. I actually called him. 2-second conversation. Okay, so Michael Jordan said he approached everything step by step. Now, you guys remember last week we were talking about the famous failures? And Michael Jordan was on that list. So, oddly enough, this was completely separated from that, but somebody else came up with this as well. So, Michael Jordan always set short-term goals. And we know that he was cut from his basketball team when he was in high school. And he said that he started to set some short-term goals, and every time he accomplished those goals, then he set another short-term goal, and that led to another something else. He said every time he learned something, and even in the long version of the quote, he talks a little bit about sometimes he learned that he just didn't like the way he felt. He didn't like the way he felt when he failed. So his goal became becoming a starter on the varsity team. Now, that was something that was going to require a lot of steps. So he stayed focused and he started practicing. And he didn't just say, hey, this is my goal and this is what I'm going to do. He said, this is my goal, so now I need to do this and this and this and this in order to do that. He approached it all with the end in mind. So an example of this, my daughter's a volleyball player. So with my daughter, there are 6 positions. And with her, we spent a week all summer working on a specific skill. So one week we just served. That's all we did. She was mad, but that's all she did. She served overhand, underhand. I made her do it backwards a couple times, like all kinds of crazy stuff. The next week, we just focused on setting. And she's really not good at that. So she had a lot of problems. She just set. That's all she had to do. Set, set, set. The next week, we focused on spiking. Another skill she's really got some work to do on. So we just focused on one skill at a time. And that's what Jordan is saying he did as well. If we focus in on one thing that's going to get us to that next goal, or that smaller goal, then we're able to more easily accomplish this. Keeping focused is really difficult. So when you're thinking about the goals that you have listed here, I want you to think about how you're going to achieve those goals. We are not going to do that part. So what we're going to talk about are the SMART goals. So the SMART goals are ensuring that your goals are specific. When you're making sure that these are specific, you want to state exactly what it is that you want to accomplish. So this is where you're adding in very specific details. So if you say that you want to win $1 million, not very realistic, which we'll get to in a minute, but how are you going to accomplish that? So let's say that you want to earn $1 million. There's a difference between getting $1 million and earning $1 million. So if you want to earn $1 million, then you need to be very specific as to when you want to earn that $1 million. So one of my former students, he got a job at some financial planning place. He said, hey, Boomer, let's go out to dinner. And I was like, oh, my student wants to take me out to dinner. No, he just wanted to financially plan my life and tell me how to spend my money. But I got salsa and chips out of it. So it was okay. So he talks about how if we put $50 away every month for this many months, then by the time you're this age, then you're going to have this amount of money. Okay, so that was a very specific plan, a plan that I will never adhere to because I do not have that kind of focus. So when you're being specific, make sure you're putting some time constraints on it. And we're going to talk about the time here in just a few minutes. Make sure that you're also identifying any key players in that. So my daughter wanted to be captain of her 8th grade volleyball team. So in order to do that, she realized that she would probably have to be co-captain because there's another girl on the team that's really, really good and has a lot of strengths as well. So her goal became this year she would like to be co-captain with Katia, the other girl. So that became her goal. She was very specific in that. So the second part is measurable. Now this is something that becomes really difficult because we can't always measure success. So we need to make sure that we can measure success in some way. So how are you going to demonstrate and evaluate how you have met that goal? Whether it's the short goal that gets to the end goal or the longer term goal. So we'll go away from the volleyball part of sports. So my husband won 7th place this weekend at the drag strip. So he went drag racing, and he usually doesn't do as well as he did this weekend. So he wanted to get his time under like 6:20. So he was creeping forward and creeping forward and creeping forward. He was adjusting. He was moving things around. And his measure was his mile per hour and how fast he got down in the quarter mile and then the 8th mile. So he was measuring certain things. So find what you can measure by. Achievable. So this again is where we're going to make sure we're realistic and we're challenging ourselves. So we want something that we can actually achieve. So when my student said to me, hey, can you donate $50 a month to yourself? And I was like, no, I'm going to teach that $50 a month. I'm going to spend that $50 a month. There's no way I can do that. That was not achievable for me. That was not something that I could actually do. Relevant. So if you set small goals to reach that end goal, make sure that they relate to one another. So if your end goal is to earn $1 million, it's probably not relevant to have 5 other kids. She does. They don't really match up. Yeah, that's the way you lose $1 million, but not gain $1 million. And then time bound. So when we're talking about being time bound, you want to set some constraints on when you can get something done, when you can achieve something. Try to be realistic. When you're setting these goals, try to be realistic. And as Jordan was talking about, be focused. If you can't be focused, sometimes we have to reevaluate. And there's nothing wrong with reevaluating. My goal many times has been to teach, but you guys all know I was the last in, so I was the first out. So I didn't always have control over those things, but I always knew that I wanted to get back into teaching. Every time I lost my job, I wanted to get back into teaching. So I set another goal for myself. There were times that I applied to schools and I was like, hell no, I am not going to teach at this school. But I applied because I knew it was going to give me some practice. I was going to be able to answer those questions. I went on an interview at Kokomo High School. There was no way I was taking that job. No way.
Hey.
There was no way. But the vice principal and I went to school together, and she called me, and she was like, oh, Martha. Okay, Kelly. And I went in, and it was interviewing for me. It was practice, because there was no way. Going into it, there was no way I was going to take that job. And I immediately let her know, because I'm not that mean. But there was no way that I was going to take that job, and I used it as practice for myself. So I used that as an opportunity.
Hi.
Why?
Is Kokomo High bad?
Yeah, it's bad.
Yeah.
Black sitting here. She know?
It's not
She's
the
like,
best.
whoa.
It's black in here.
It's not the best.
It's not the best school, but it's not the worst
It's
school.
not
People
the
make it
best.
sound
It's not the worst school. But it was teaching sophomores, and let me just say, I hate sophomores more than any other. They are, and their hormones are going blah, blah, blah. So they're bad. Yep. I just got rid of 2 sophomores, and I've got 1 that's going to be a sophomore. So I'll be gray by the time they
You
all
make
get
it to
here.
your senior year, you're going to be in high school just chilling. Especially if your credit is up.
Okay, guys. Any questions over goal setting?
Don't take it down yet.
Okay. We're not going to do the research part of this. We're not going to look at all of the people who have set goals and attained their goals. We really just didn't have time for that. So after this, we are going to talk a little bit more about vocabulary. So you want to take some notes on the vocabulary part. This is something that you guys will carry into most of your coursework. Besides math, I cannot think of a course that doesn't have vocabulary. Math does, but it's kind of isolated. It's not really in a sentence, which is what we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on the context clues. Chris?
You don't have a vocab thing on.
No, just write it on your own. Just write your notes on your own.
Hey, are these the right page we talking about?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Oh, we do need one of those, don't we?
Yes, but you will not use it until later this week, next week, into next week.
What? Flash drive?
Yeah, the flash drive. If you want to use a Google Drive,
Oh, I've heard it.
there you go. But flash drives are
This won't
easier.
work. We need the flash drive, huh?
Yeah. Oh, you can use that for if you have Google Docs on there. You can access the Google Docs. That's why you probably need a flash drive. Flash drives are just easier.
So get the flash drive.
Yeah, probably. Okay. So the good news is, since we cut out all of those people, if you guys can stay focused, then you can probably get done early today. So let's talk first about context clues. So when you're reading something, and you come across a word that you do not know, the worst thing that you can do is stop. Any
What?
ideas why?
Stop what?
Stop reading. Tyrus? Okay, so if you stop, what do you think happens to your understanding? Okay. Okay. When you take yourself out of the situation, you're losing comprehension. So remember we talked about active reading, and we've been talking about active reading over and over again. When you're actively reading, your brain is engaged in what you're doing. You're physically engaging your brain. Kind of like when you're exercising, which I don't know a lot about, let's be real. So I don't know a lot about it, but I'll pretend I do. So when you're exercising and you stop and you take a break, it's really hard to come back to it and come back to the same spot you were in. You've lost something in the translation.
That's true.
It is. Active reading is the same way. So when you come across a word that you don't know, if you stop and try to find that through a dictionary, a lot of people want to go straight to a dictionary. It's the worst thing that you can do. You can.
Write this down.
You can write this down.
I learned it down about.
Okay. Is it important to know how to pronounce the words?
No.
It is not. Now, we're gonna do some reading today. And we're gonna talk about it together. And you guys are gonna see some of my techniques, some of the things that I do that may work for you, may not work for you. They may be okay, they may not. But they're strategies. They're strategies that you can try. Pronouncing the word correctly is nice, but it doesn't really matter in your comprehension. When it comes down to it, it's not going to matter in your comprehension. So when you come across a word that you don't know, don't stop reading. That's the first step. Don't stop. Then you're going to use the rest of the sentence. Sometimes it's the sentence before, sometimes it's the sentence after. As long as you keep reading, then you're going to be able to judge the meaning of the word. It doesn't always work. So we're going to talk about what else to do later on, but we're going to focus today on context clues. So context clues, in the sentence that you come across, you may have a vocabulary word, and you may have a synonym or an antonym for that word. So what's a synonym?
Sounds the same.
It's the same word. It's the word, but there's a different meaning, or a different word, but it's the same meaning, essentially. Okay? An antonym. Word that means
The opposite.
the opposite. Good. Sometimes we even have The definition of a word.
I
Yes.
hear it. What was the synonym?
Synonyms are words that are the same.
The same.
Like buy and buy. Buy.
Those are
Bye, bye, bye.
homophones.
And
So-
antonym is the
Different. So, synonyms. Writing utensil or pen. Pencil. Same thing. They're synonyms for one another. An antonym would be a computer. Something that's completely different. Sometimes you may also have definitions. So some of your clues may just be a definition of the word itself. So you can add in definitions. And the one that I like the best, because it helps me wrap my brain around it, are examples. Examples I find are really helpful. Most of the time when it's a concept, examples are really helpful. If it's a word and there is a word-for-word correlation of the word, then synonyms are usually helpful. And we're going to look at examples of this here in just a minute. Or examples of the synonyms. So you come across a word that you don't know, and then you're going to look at the sentence above it, the rest of that sentence, and the sentence behind it for any synonyms, antonyms, definitions, or examples of what the word may mean. So your vocabulary words this week, we're going to use a synonym and we're going to use an example. So the first word is the word objective, or objectives.
What?
Objectives.
That's a C.
The first word.
This is
Oh, I
a
didn't see
vocabulary
it.
word.
I'm looking
Yep,
like-
these are vocabulary words. So what does objectives mean? What are objectives? Goals. Good. So objectives have a synonym, a direct synonym, and it's pretty easy, they're goals. So objectives are goals. Now consequences are a little bit more, they have a little bit more to them. So we can't use a direct synonym for them, so we need a definition and an example. So what is a consequence?
Getting in trouble.
Brandon?
Punishment for your action.
Okay, so it's a punishment for an action, or it can just be the result. So when you think of consequences, you don't always have to think of something negative. We typically do. We typically think of consequences as something negative. But the consequence is simply the result of an action. So if I open the door, the consequence is the air will be coming in.
It's not cooler out there.
Yes, it is. A lot cooler. So it's just the result of an action. So you also can think of an example. So my example, because you guys know how I feel about my brother. So my brother will go to jail next week as a consequence of his stupidity.
What did he do?
He's not going to his classes like he's supposed to. And my mom paid for the lawyer, so that's my mom's mistake.
Are you talking about like drug and alcohol classes?
No.
Abuse of classes.
For that crazy old girlfriend.
Oh,
Oh.
assault class.
Yeah, Midges ain't gonna, yeah, he's going to jail.
Yeah, he is.
Oh, you know the classes in the box.
How long he's gonna stay here?
Huh?
How long he's gonna stay there?
About
He
a
needs to
week.
stay there for a long
Oh, he
time.
gonna stay about a week.
90 days.
No.
I don't know. He can go as long as he needs to. He's good in prison, in jail. He does really well there. Yeah, he's good at that.
Well, like
Yes.
everybody says.
Yep.
Hey, I wouldn't take my dad. Very birthday.
You gotta use the example.
Huh?
Right, for example, I hate my big brother too.
You do. He's my little brother.
Maybe she asked for it.
Okay.
My brother.
He didn't hit her, but she called the police before he did.
You should have left. That's what all my boyfriend
Actually, no, he did leave, and he was going to call the police, but so she even took over his house.
Y'all be needing it though. Women be needing it.
What?
Maybe she asked for it.
That's going into a whole other issue.
I know.
Okay.
So whatever you use as your example for this sentence, it's the consequence is just the result of the action. Okay? Alright, so later on, we're going to talk about more of these examples, and you guys are going to have some examples of this today as you're reading a little bit about Mesopotamia. So we are going to practice a lot with Mesopotamia, but before we get to practicing, we're going to review the active reading strategies. So you guys know what you're supposed to do to help you understand information a bit better. Ready?
Oh, don't fall.
I haven't been to sleep. I'm so tired.
I'm off no
Okay, so before you actually start reading, to engage yourself in a reading, what do?
Read the title.
Read the title. What are you looking at the title for? About.
Identify the topic.
So you're looking for the topic. So I asked Jim my first period class, and he said he watched a movie, something about war this weekend, and he was really mad because it had nothing to do about war. Sometimes the title can be misleading, so it doesn't always have to do with the topic, but we look for it to try. But that's
Don't judge a book by its cover.
yes. Sometimes the author uses something as a play on words. They may use it for many different reasons. Good. We look at the author. This is the test on Friday or Thursday that you guys are going to take.
Test?
Yep, the test will be on Thursday.
Just for what?
I'm not coming on Friday.
Reading strategies. Let me.
What are we looking for with the author?
I think I got that in my year though. That whole.
To identify the
Oh.
author. Wait.
I did that.
Okay. We
You
want
want
to
to
see.
study this?
Yep, you guys need to quiet down a little bit. So you're looking at the author to see what you know about that person. Oftentimes we know a little bit about a person based on their name. The more that you get to know authors, the more that you will get to know their style of writing. You may get to know their heritage or the content of their writing. So my favorite example of this is one of my favorite authors, Emma Donoghue. So Emma Donoghue is an Irish writer. She writes about Irish struggles for women, specifically. She's really wonderful, but her focus is always on the plight of Irish women. Yes.
I got a question about the test. So would the test be like, it'll be like that and be blanked, or
No.
can you explain how it would look?
We're going to talk about that more tomorrow when we talk about the test taking strategies. And we're going to go over this and review this today, tomorrow, Wednesday, and then right before you do it on Thursday. Okay? So, we're looking at the author to see what we know about that person. Maybe we know a little bit about their writing style. Maybe we know a little bit more about their interest. So maybe we can make some connections. After we're done looking at the title and looking at the author, what else are we looking at?
Summary.
Okay, if we have a book, we usually pick it up and we look at the back of it for a quick summary. What's that?
Do you have any good knowledge up there?
Yes. It gives us an idea of what the piece may be about. What else do we look at? What if we don't have a novel? We don't have the back of a cover, that cover. What if we just have a piece of paper?
There's the front, there's the page, the front, summary.
Okay. Yes. So we want to look at the first line
Yeah.
and the last line. Why are we looking at those?
First line and last line.
Okay. It gives you a hint as to what the author's writing about.
Right.
You guys hear?
Yeah.
Okay. It gives you a hint as to what the author is writing about. Usually, their main idea is in the first paragraph or the last paragraph. What else do you look at?
Bolded word.
The bolded words. The bolded words are kind of like what? They're really important. The author's, it's kind of like the author punching you and saying, hey, pay attention. Pay attention to this. So bolded words are meant to stand out. They're meant to jump out. What kind of words are bolded?
Like names.
Vocabulary words.
Names.
Names are usually not bolded because they are proper nouns. Names of places already have capitalization. So the author usually doesn't bring those out anymore because they already stand out on their own.
Date.
Dates are numbers, so they usually stand out on their own as well. But we look at things like things that are capitalized. When we're just glossing over something, we look at things that are capitalized, we look at things that are different, that stand out. Those include things that are bolded. They also include things that are italicized. Which is more important, bold or italicized?
Bolded.
Bolded. The italicized are what?
Not as
They're the slanted. The author wants you to know the information, but it's not as important as the bolded information. So it's kind of like the author's whispering in your ear going, hey, pay attention. But it's not a punch in the face. We look for subheadings. What are subheadings? Okay, they're like little titles that are kind of offset, and everything within that section is about that subheading. I had to write a proposal until 4 o'clock this morning for the state senate, and I had a crap ton of subheadings. Every subheading had a purpose. It had the funding. It had all of these pieces that were specific to that area. Why would an author use subheadings?
To point you in the right direction.
To point you in the right direction.
The reader.
Okay?
Let you know what you're reading about.
So it can help the reader focus in on what area they are most interested in. So let's think about this. If you have a subheading and you are the financial person and your subheading says statement of purpose, you may gloss over that. You may not care as much about that. But the one that says funding, that may be the area that you are really focused on. So your eyes go directly to that section. So subheadings give us an idea of what may be included, but it also allows us to cheat and go into information that is more significant for us.
So it's kind of like sections.
Yes, sections.
Boom.
Sections, subheadings are the section titles.
Boom.
And that's basically what it is.
Subheading.
Most of the time, subheadings are also bolded.
Because they're very, very important.
They're very important.
Wait, what about those little numbers that you see when they have definitions?
So those are like footnotes or endnotes. So depending on where they're located, they're footnotes if they're at the bottom of the page, the foot of the page.
It has like the numbers at the bottom?
Yes.
Okay.
Is it, do you say it's for more that they're interested in?
What's that?
Or sub-readers are important that helps readers as well?
Focus in on a specific area. So footnotes, endnotes, anything that is basically anything that is different from the text. You guys are going to be looking at pieces that have pictures. Pictures are significant. Graphs are important. Any kind of visual pieces, anything visual that stands out, that pops, it should be considered significant. You can usually gloss over information and understand a little bit more about the meaning because of your ability to gloss over the information. So when you're reading, this is all before you start reading, when you read, you have to take different steps. What is the purpose of previewing the information? What is the purpose of all that before stuff?
Does it give you a little bit of an idea of what you're going into?
Okay, it gives you an idea of what you're going into. What else?
Get you focused.
Okay, it may help you focus. What does it help you access? Prior knowledge. So get that in your head. Prior knowledge. The before step is to help you access what you already know about that topic. So you're able to access, do I already know something about this? Do I feel comfortable with this? Do I need to understand it a different way? Do I really need to focus in on the graphs and the visuals? Or can I just read the information because I like it and I enjoy it? So you are going to tailor your reading based on the previewing that you do. So if it's something that you're interested in, do you usually need to take a lot of notes and go through the information and highlight a bunch of stuff? No. You're interested in it, so you get excited about it and you're able to retain it a little bit more. So if you're not interested in it, then you really need to isolate each of these steps a bit more in order to try to gain some better understanding, better comprehension. So during our reading, we chunk information. How do we chunk it?
Break it down into sections.
Into what kind of sections? Paragraphs. Good. So authors separate things into paragraphs. So when we chunk information, we chunk it into one paragraph at a time. As you're reading that paragraph, you're taking notes. We talked about a specific note-taking skill. What did we talk about? Underlining, circling things, making notes in the margins. What's it called? Annotating. It's going to be on your test. Annotating.
Can you spell it?
Annotating is taking notes in the margins, underlining things, highlighting things. What do you have to worry about with highlighters?
They bleed through the other side.
Sometimes they bleed through to the other side. So when you're underlining, are you underlining everything? Okay, so when we think of things that are the most important, a couple of things I want you guys to think about. So first of all, if it's repeated over and over again, it's probably important. So later on, when you read about Mesopotamia, Mesopotamia isn't the whole idea. It's actually the places within Mesopotamia. So every time you see Mesopotamia or one of the city-states in Mesopotamia, you could mark those all as the same because they all fall underneath the same category. So it's kind of like when we talk about dogs, we may talk about different types of dogs, but they're all different dogs. So you circle all of those things, make sure they're all similar. So I will tell you guys on your test, you're going to have to annotate. If you just underline everything, you're not going to get any points for it. So underline or circle things that are significant. Just like the author does with you, you want things to stand out. So circle some things, put a box around some things, underline some things, make sure they stand out as different.
You gotta take notes too, like during the test, like take notes.
Yep.
Right off to the side.
Now when you write off to the side, because you can annotate, when you write off to the side, that's when you are identifying the main idea and any key details.
That's the word.
Most of the time, that little piece that you have off to the side should just be the main idea. The key details are going to be in the passage itself. Those key details are going to be things like numbers, places, names. So you don't necessarily need to add those to a list to the side. You can just add the main idea in. What is main idea composed of?
Topic.
Topic plus what? This is going to be on your test.
Yeah.
Topic.
Topic plus what? The thesis is like the main idea, but the thesis is you as an author.
The main idea.
The topic plus the direction the author is going in.
I mean, it's gotta be the main idea.
So the main idea is going to be that word or words that are repeated over and over again that makes up the topic. Oftentimes that's where. Oftentimes the topic is where? In the title. Oftentimes a form of that topic is going to be in the title. It's not always, but it is often. And then the direction that the author is going with that information is just what the author is saying about that. That's the main idea. When you're chunking the information, just do it one paragraph at a time. Why don't you want to do 2 or 3 paragraphs at a time? What could get lost?
Loose focus.
You could get lost. You're taking in too much information.
Yes.
So this is what our brains do. When we're writing stuff down, we make a kinesthetic connection with our brain. So you guys remember the famous failures. Where was Michael Jordan? Top left-hand side. Who was down at the very bottom? Einstein. You guys still have those connections to something that you had last week. You still have those connections because you've made a kinesthetic attachment to it. So when you read something and you write about it, you will be able to go back to it and look at those details. So when you're answering a question, you may not know the answer, but you know where it is in the passage. So that's what we're going to be practicing with a little bit more today. Now remember, yes, Mike.
Is it kinesthetic when you learn your hands?
It's a physical connection. Mm-hmm. So when you're writing something, you've got a physical connection to it. Yep.
I never use that like that 'cause that's how I work with my hand.
And that's why we've talked about doing these things in order to increase your connections to it. So if you're previewing the information, then you are looking at it and you're thinking about your prior knowledge of it. And if you have any connections, then you've made a third connection to it. When you chunk it, you're reading it.
Right. That's
Now, how many of you have a little voice in your head that reads things? Okay, that's what I do. So when I'm reading something, the voice in my head is reading it. And the voice in my head sounds like I think I sound until I listen to myself on a recording or
I
something.
know.
Exactly.
It's weird. So as you're chunking the information, you're reading it and you're making another connection. If you take notes, you're making that kinesthetic connection to it. And then if you identify the main idea off to the side, you've made another attachment to it. The think, write, and discuss are 3 more opportunities for those attachments. So again, it's meant to increase your understanding of the information. What's think, write, discuss? Okay, you think about what?
What you're gonna write about.
What you read?
Like,
What you read?
but it's asking you to do. Like, you're thinking about the directions.
Think about it. It's basically what you're going to start with. But everything.
Think about what you've learned.
Good. Think about what you've learned. You don't need to think about the questions yet.
Grind.
You don't need to think about what you already knew.
Right.
Think about what you've learned. Good. What are you supposed to write?
Whatever.
You have to write about what you learned too and read,
Right.
right?
You thought about it. What you learned. I don't know.
Whatever, Miss
What are you
Porter.
supposed to write about?
You don't know.
About.
You are supposed to write a summary. Remember, you want to write a summary. Summaries. A summary can be a paragraph. What should a summary include? We talked about this with your group last week. The main idea plus what? Key details. Other important things, basically. So, one of the most important things about a summary is that it should not include any of your opinion.
You said it should or shouldn't?
Should not.
Shouldn't include
Nope.
your main idea.
It shouldn't include your opinion. So whatever you think about the information, personally, don't write that as part of your summary. You can discuss that, but that shouldn't be part of your summary. A summary should only be the main idea and key details. So who are you supposed to discuss with?
Each other?
Other people who have read it, which would hopefully be each other, not always. So discuss it with other people who have read it. Why?
To get a.
Get more,
A full understanding.
Like maybe they have information that you didn't get.
Okay, they may add information to what you have. You may be able to add information to what they have. So you guys can come to a compromise or consensus. There may be things that they caught that you didn't. Good. So who else do you talk to about it?
You?
Maybe the teacher?
Okay, you could. And most of the time I'm another reader. So I'd be considered another reader.
The author.
I don't even know who the author to some of this stuff is. So that may not work.
That's what yourself.
You're going to talk to people who haven't read it. So why are you talking to people who haven't read it? Brandon?
See if they know, like, see if they can get what you're trying to say
Good.
from what they wrote down.
So you are essentially teaching them what you've just learned.
Yeah.
And when you teach something, when you teach information, you're guaranteeing that you understand the information better. So you may have the information up here in your brain, but you don't want to sound like an idiot when it comes out of your mouth. So your brain goes through this process of, okay, I've got to figure this out before I say it. So you organize it before you say it. And then when you teach it to someone else, you understand the information even better. Okay.
And this is all got to do with English.
No, this has to do with any of the information besides math. I still can't wrap my mind around that. But any of the English courses, this is a history course too. So the history information, science information, you can do the same thing with science. This is how I had to survive in science classes, but I hate science.
So what about them little, what do you
I'd
call it?
rather do world history.
Like things when you can put it like the main idea.
So like a graphic organizer? Yeah.
Will that work?
That will be, you can use that to take some of your notes.
Okay.
So basically what you're talking about is another note-taking method. And annotating is just the method that I like the best and that I want you guys to practice with because it's the most practical for ECAs and for a lot of the work that you guys are going to do to build up to that. But what you're talking about is like a graphic organizer. So when you guys get your novel packets, you're going to have to do a graphic organizer. So you will have the novel in the middle, and then you may start branching off of that information. You could do the same thing with what you're getting here. The problem with that is that you're doing a lot of extra writing, and you're not necessarily connecting as much to comprehending the information. What you're going to find with a lot of the questions that you're asking this course specifically, because they're based in world history, so they're based in ancient Egypt, they're based in leaders, civilization, Greek and Roman myth, well, Greek mythology more than Roman. You'll find that when you're doing these responses, when you're creating these responses, most of the time they're asking you to take an idea or concept out of the reading and explore that more, but use that for evidence. So it's just organizing it a little bit differently. And that's what we're going to be working on with constructive responses tomorrow. Okay? Good question. All right, any questions over this?
No.
We're going to keep reviewing it. We're going to go over it as much as possible because you guys will have the test on Thursday. The test is worth 50 points. That's like 5 vocabulary quizzes. So 50 points goes into the assessment category, which is 65% of your grade. So it's a large chunk. It's about half of the final. It's the same as the midterm.
I gotta get
No. Nope. Not on test.
C.
All right, you guys ready?
No. These count. This is a code feed.
He's done.
Tell them. Done.
Done. So how about you go for higher than that?
But I'm saying you can pass. Motherfucker, give me the credit. I'm saying you gonna be there. My bad.
There you go.
You said you go for a D,
That's
so you
how.
can get an A,
That's what I
B,
made.
Okay. Okay, so for those of you who are highly disturbed by the amount of noise in this class, I do have a fourth period option that is much quieter.
Keep off in your head.
So I don't want you guys to start reading this yet, but I would like you to put your name at the top. So what we're going to do is practice the active reading strategies with this piece. So as we read this, I'm going to show you what will be expected of you as you go through this process on the test on Thursday. Okay? So the first step of active reading is what?
Look at the title.
Looking at the title. Now you're looking at the title to see what? Okay, so the title is what a difference a few years can make. And what does that tell us about this piece?
Time.
Something to do with time.
Yeah.
That's about it. It's really generic and we don't get a lot of information out of it. The next step is what?
Looking at the bolded letters.
The next step is looking at the author. But there is no author, so we have to skip over that step. It doesn't exist. Now we're going to look at the bolded words, which are subheadings in some instances, and some are vocabulary.
Mesopotamia.
So the subheading there is Mesopotamia. Some of you may go, whatever. Mesopotamia, inhospitable, domesticated. Those words are bolded. Some of you are going, I have no idea. Some of you may know what those things mean. If you know it, access that, but you don't need to do anything for that. Are there any italicized words?
No.
No. What type of things stand out?
The bolded.
Okay, there are some numbers. We get 3,500. Let's go through piece by piece. We get numbers. 3,500, 1792 to 1750 BC. So if we see BC, and we see numbers that go backwards, it's before Christ.
Yeah.
It's a really, really long time ago. That's what the BC stands for. But if you don't know that that's what the BC stands for, then that's just something that you'll just skip over. You don't necessarily. What's that?
I said, how do you know it's before Christ?
That's what the BC stands for. Okay.
What does before Christ mean?
It was before Jesus walked the earth. Okay.
There was man before Jesus.
So the next part of this is looking at the pictures. So the pictures include a map that is really hard to read.
It shows you Mesopotamia.
What does the map show us?
Where Mesopotamia is.
Good. The map shows us where Mesopotamia is.
that is literally between rivers.
And it literally between rivers. Good. The other picture is kind of hard to read. Kind of hard to see. Because you know what it is. So hold on to that.
Okay.
So the pictures are kind of hard to read. You're going to encounter that. Especially when things have been copied over and over again. So you've got a map and you've got a big statue looking thing. That's it. That's all we have to worry about. So we're going to chunk the information and take notes as we're chunking. Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, derives its name and existence from the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. These two rivers created the Fertile Crescent in the midst of surrounding inhospitable territory. The space we call Mesopotamia is roughly the same as that of the modern country of Iraq. So as you're going through and reading this, what are things that you should underline or circle?
Between the rivers.
Okay? So
The names
land
of the
between the rivers, why is that important?
You said circle.
Underline it or circle it.
So you'll know where to find it.
That's what the word means. So Mesopotamia is the land between the rivers. How do you know that?
It tells you.
Yeah.
It says it there,
And
And-
it shows on the map.
it shows it on the map that we've already accessed. So that's a confirmation that that's what that means, between the rivers. Now what else?
Tigers and Euphrates.
Tigris and Euphrates. So, a lot of times when people come across words that they don't know how to pronounce, they get stuck on them. So, a strategy that I use that has worked for me for 38 years is just to make up words. So, Tigris looks like tiger. Euphrates looks like elephant.
Yeah.
Starts with D. So, I just say it's between the tiger and the elephant. That's what it is. So, Mesopotamia is between the tiger and the elephant. That will give you the ties to the letters and the way that the spelling is. So when you go to the test or when you go to a test question, you are going to make those connections. Okay? These two rivers created the Fertile Crescent. Anything important there?
Fertile
Yeah,
Crescent.
the Fertile Crescent.
They created.
Okay, Fertile Crescent. That'll work. In the midst of surrounding inhospitable territory.
And how to put that.
Has anybody figured out what inhospitable means yet? Okay,
Oh.
and how do you know that?
Because you can't live there. That's the point.
How do you know that that's what that means?
Hospital means safe.
Right, that's what I was like.
I was gonna say.
I think hospital means living.
Hold on, guys. One at a time here. Tony?
Friendly.
Okay, and why do you say that?
It's a territory.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
territory.
they're just not.
Okay, so you guys, some of you guys know the word, so you think you're using context clues, but you're actually using the prefix, root, and suffix. So we were looking at what hospital means, and when we think of hospital, we usually think they help. But in means not. So not helpful. And when you read it, not helpful doesn't really make too much sense. So you can equate that to dangerous. Dangerous. Yeah, you can equate that to dangerous. So if you have figured out the meaning of the word on your own, then you could write dangerous, make yourself a little arrow, and write dangerous off to the side. So if you made a little arrow and then just, good. Yeah, you guys are going to be turning this in for points.
Is this our exit?
What,
Nope.
this, today,
Gandhi in this time.
this
He
homework,
was in the midst of some of this, yes.
is this homework?
I remember
Nope.
doing this in 6th grade. We watched a movie about Gandhi.
Gandhi's pretty awesome.
Right?
My daughter's a Buddhist. So.
Really?
Mhm.
I didn't know that.
Yep. What's that?
We watch movies now.
We are going to watch some videos, but they're mostly like BBC things, History Channel stuff, the awesome stuff. Okay.
The next one is
So,
modern day Iraq.
modern day Iraq is the size equivalent. Where else do we see that?
Right here.
Where else do we see Iraq?
On the map.
On the map. So, make connections in whatever way you need to.
Where y'all see that on the map?
At the very bottom of the map,
I see it.
Arabian.
it says a contemporary map of Iraq and the surrounding regions.
Oh, okay.
Mine's all blurry. I can't see it.
I can't see it.
Yeah, it's right there, that black bolded part. At the bottom of the map.
It's a lot of black.
So we underline the modern country of Iraq.
What's that?
We underline the modern country of Iraq.
You can.
I can't see it either. Where is Iraq at?
Where she said you got
I think right here.
Okay,
No, maybe.
this is the process that you would go through to understand information a bit deeper. So if you were to write a summary off to the side, what would your summary say? One person, raise your hand.
Can you read? Okay,
if you were to create a summary is just, of this section is just your main idea. So what is the main idea of just this paragraph? Mike?
I'm talking about
The Mesopotamia all the way through to Iraq.
that it's between rivers and it's not inhabitable to humans.
Okay? Brandon, what do you think?
State the fact that you're talking about Mesopotamia. It's the land between the rivers, which are the Tigris and Euphrates, and the place is inhospitable.
Okay? So we want to pull out the key pieces.
I have a tiger in it. That was gonna be too dangerous.
Okay, so that's, and I'm going to be honest with you guys. When I'm writing stuff, I don't like to write out every single word. So I'm just going to write Meso is between the tiger and the elephant, and it's unfriendly.
You were right,
Yep.
what?
I'm going to write Meso.
Meso between the tiger and the elephant.
So I'm just using Meso instead of Mesopotamia. Meso is between the tiger and the elephant.
And you don't want to live there. Inhospitability.
It's dangerous.
And it's dangerous. So, for the next 10 minutes, you guys are going to do the same on your own with the remaining 4 paragraphs.
Right.
Do not do, hold on, do not do the questions on the back. Your grade will be on your annotations.
So we gotta write a summary.
No.
Brandon, what?
You have to summarize as well.
Yes. So underline things and then just write a couple of lines or a line off to the side as to what it is. Write directly on this piece of paper.
I can't summarize on this piece of paper.
You're just doing every paragraph, just off to the side. So annotate the remaining 5 by yourself.